So, according to the Hollywood Reporter, John Lasseter ain't coming back. That sabbatical will never end. Now, this ran under a headline that revealed that Disney Animation, that's today Disney Animation and Pixar together, are having a quote-unquote day of listening to get the pulse of their employees on not just the current atmosphere, but if John Lasseter maybe could come back. And I have two takeaways from this idea of a day of listening. The first is that I hope that it allows for private discussions with human resources instead of a town hall, or else you'll never get the real lay of the land. And then second, apparently there was a day of listening a few years ago and there were complaints back then about John Lasseter's lecherous behavior. It's been labeled as just hugging, but if you've looked into the matter, it was actually much worse, because everyone in Hollywood hugs. But anyway, Ed Catmull, very politely and privately relayed this information to John Lasseter instead of, changing his behavior and thanking Catmull for a heads up. Instead, John Lasseter decided not to speak for Catmull for a week. And I also don't think that outcome from the first day of listening is a good motivator to speak up at day of listening part 2, right? You're like, well, we talked about the problems last time and it took years for you to fix it, and only until the Me Too movement got some momentum. So if you feel that your grievance might get like some momentum in the overall, social media sphere, well then sure, by all means bring it up. But otherwise, it's going to fall on deaf ears. But that's a whole different discussion about the problems with human resources today at companies. We're talking about Disney Animation. And since it seems that John Lasseter creeped out at least all the women who work at Disney Animation, it does seem unlikely that he would be able to return. So who might take over? There's some speculation as to who, which we'll discuss in just a moment. But first, to avoid this happening again, where all their animation is suddenly leaderless with just one fell swoop, they're going to separate Disney Animation and Pixar back into two different divisions. John Lasseter, of course, was overseeing both of them. And I think this is a great idea. I think it's great to inspire friendly in-house competition between the two. It's good for the bottom line, right? They should be constantly trying to one-up each other, and there shouldn't be someone at the top who is, playing favorites. John Lasseter, well, he started his career in Disney Animation, but he built Pixar. And then also, looking out for projects, being like, oh, well, this division's working on this, so maybe you shouldn't do that, or we should move this here. It should be friendly war between Disney Animation and Pixar. And I have to say, I always felt that under John Lasseter, Disney Animation really did lose its way from the days of Walt and then Howard Ashman / Jeffrey Katzenberg. And it became way too Pixar-y in that it was message-driven in its storytelling. And if you can't already tell, I do think it was time for John Lasseter to go at both Disney Animation and Pixar, because both have seen better days creatively. But of course, I wish it were under different circumstances. Now, as for who should head up Pixar, the rumor is that it might be Pete Docter or Pete Docter paired with Andrew Stanton. These are, of course, two very famous Pixar creatives. And as for Andrew Stanton, though, he's the guy who tried to make a break for live action and had to come back with his tail between his legs. It's a shame. John Carter is actually a pretty darn good movie, but that's one of the most infamous cases of advertising ever, as we've discussed, and that Andrew Stanton didn't know how to film for a marketing campaign. And also there was a new head of publicity at the time who was not getting along within the infrastructure of the company at Disney either. It was just a perfect storm for failure. And again, a really solid movie slipped through the cracks. And Andrew Stanton's live action career was over before it even really started. And so he's back at Pixar. And now might soon be heading it. Talk about failing upward. That's a big thing in business, if you haven't heard that term before. Then as for Disney, obviously I don't like these choices, but I do have a solution. And then over at Disney Animation, they're thinking of having 3 people headed up, and that would be Jennifer Lee, Rich Moore, and Byron Howard. Basically, the Zootopia team, as Lee did some rewrites on that script. Now, I have, again, problems here. Now, Jennifer Lee, she's so far just a one-hit wonder to date, and that was by the skin of her teeth, as Frozen needed last minute restructuring. Boy, that's crazy how last minute that was. And they haven't been able to duplicate it. Olaf's Frozen adventure, the ride's pretty sweet, but that Olaf short, that was abysmal. And also we'll see if her foray into live action turns out better than Stanton's did. Then as for Moore, undeniably talented, but there's a sameness to his work, and so I don't know if I'd want him running everything out of Disney Animation. And then as for Byron Howard, he really hasn't carved out his own creative persona. I guess right now I would just call him zany, right? But if he can't even define who he is as an individual, how is he going to help a whole division define itself, right? So here's the thing. Is producer suddenly a dirty word in Hollywood? These are all directors and writers. Why are they even up for the job? The two most successful division heads today, at Disney no less, have never directed or written a movie. Now, I know some of you are probably already like, but Kathleen Kennedy is a disaster, Grace. She might be a disaster to you, but so far she's 3 for 3 in hitting the $1 billion club with her movies. And 2 of those are in the top 10 grossing films of all time. Although I think we can all agree that a loss is certainly coming her way, her first loss. But it's not necessarily going to derail her. We shall see. But right now, she's full of win. And I think that she and Feige certainly make a strong case for hiring someone similar to head up another Disney division. Or any division in Hollywood, as we often discuss. I mean, just look at the history of Disney Animation itself. Walt Disney stepped back from directing and writing early on. Howard Ashman was a lyricist, right? But the real force behind the first Disney Renaissance was Jeffrey Katzenberg, even if those who worked with him at Disney Animation are loath to admit it. Just watch Waking Sleeping Beauty, not only to see how instrumental Katzenberg was in shaping the Disney Renaissance, but also for some juicy gossip as to how hated he was. You know what? Sometimes the person who's forcing people to do what needs to be done isn't well liked, but he did get the job done. And Katzenberg was, and up until just recently, a producer. And what does the DCEU so desperately need? A good producer. So producers are important and should be treated as such, because they're supposed to see the big picture, find exciting talent. For instance, Jeffrey Katzenberg was the one who brought in Alan Menken and Howard Ashman. And they also keep that talent on track creatively and business-wise. If they're creatives themselves, I think maybe they're a little susceptible to, the complaints of a creative. I just want to do my thing. Where a producer's like, that's nice, but I have to deliver a hit movie. And don't you want to have a success? I wish a strong producer had turned to Denis Villeneuve and said, I think it's really going to derail your career if, mainstream audiences don't like your movie. You might want to think about that, Denis, and then maybe Denis would have been saved the tremendous flop that was Blade Runner 2049. I know that's going to annoy a lot of you, but it's a harsh reality. No matter what you think of it creatively, financially, the thing is a disaster. And they just got a couple of craft Oscar nominations, so that's not enough to pull it out of the fire. So I agree in keeping Disney Animation and Pixar leadership separate, but I feel strongly that they should hire producers to head up both. And I'd recommend actually pulling in live action producers from outside the Disney Animation community to bring in a fresh, aggressive perspective. Jeffrey Katzenberg came from live action, and I think some of the most exciting things happening in animation today are due to live action, creatives coming in there to mix it up. That would maybe also be a good idea to bring in, directors, at least live action directors into animation. Disney certainly has quite the Rolodex at this point. For instance, they just fired Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and look at the amazing stuff they're doing with the Into the Spider-Verse animated movie over at Sony. It's a shame that Disney couldn't bring them over into their animation area. But would they go? I don't know. But you can see that's where perhaps that energy should be going in terms of writers, directors into the specific films, not to overseeing the entire division. Because I think Animation and Pixar truly made waves when they were leading the charge creatively in animation. And I say today I would categorize both as lobbing softballs at the audience and awards voters. Of course, there are exceptions like Coco, but for the most part, that's what I believe is happening right now. I'm not saying it's not entertaining, but it's not like it once was. I think we can all agree about that. And if they want to have a couple softballs in there, that's fine, but I'm missing those bold creative flourishes, right? That are also very strong from a business perspective. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the future of Disney animation? Be sure to share them down below, and as always, you can check out some more videos right now.